Good hustle, soldier.
Sorry, sir. I was still in attack mode. You know how testosterone is.
Private Lee Lemon may well be the finest recruit I've seen in all my years of service. That young man fills me with hope and some other emotions that are weird and deeply confusing me.
Hello everybody, my name is Jake Whale. Welcome back to Bad 90s Music. We're doing the last week of Disney Month. For some reason I decided to make March 2018 Disney Month on the Bad 90s Music channel. I don't really remember why. I'm just nakedly chasing clicks at this point, I think. And I think, oh well, how about Disney movies from the 90s? If I'm being honest, I don't remember why I ever wanted to do a YouTube channel about 90s music either. But the point is, this has given me a chance to go back and evaluate some of these songs in their own terms and try to figure out, okay, how well do these songs work outside of the context of their own movies and outside of the context of their own times even. And it turns out that a lot of them do work surprisingly well. So the men who were more or less in charge of Disney at the time when they were having their most successful period since their classic days of Walt being at the helm. He died very tragically in a fatal helicopter crash, and then shortly after that Jeffrey Katzenberg left to form DreamWorks with Steven Spielberg, so that whole team that was behind their most successful period was pretty much over with by that time. I think that's generally agreed that that's when that period basically ends, but they kept on going, they kept making films. Could have looked at any of their movies that came after The Lion King. I was going semi-chronologically up to this point, starting with the beginning of the 90s, and from there, that's where the movies start to get a little bit less commercially successful, and maybe a lot of the songs from them aren't as well remembered as the earlier films. So from then, basically, there's Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I still haven't seen, Hercules, and the one I'm going to be talking about today, which is Mulan. And the reason why I picked Mulan over all of those is because it's, well, first of all, it's either my first or second favorite movie from this period, so it's got that, and it's also because it means something to me that I think none of the other movies mean, and it's kind of hard to put my finger on. I'm not quite sure why. I think part of it has to do with my age. I think by the time I was about 15 years old, I had just recently graduated past the point where everything I watch seems amazing to me, because I'm just looking at it and saying, wow, how do they put together, these drawings with sounds and put music to them? By that point, I started to view things a little more critically than I ever did before, and I started to develop actual opinions about them. And the fact that they were able to make this movie at a time in my life when I was like that, when I was getting a little more, jaded, a little more cynical about what I was seeing, makes it, I think, more impressive. It's more successful in the area of impressing me personally, and that's why it means a little something more to me. And like I talked about before, they were kind of branching out. They're continuing to branch out and try to make films or stories that concern different cultures and different parts of the world that they hadn't explored before. In this case, it goes back to China. That meant something to me. I wasn't really going to talk about this too much, but my grandfather's family did come over here to the United States from China back in the 20s, so I felt a bit of a personal connection to this movie because of that, and the fact that it happened to be a really good movie also helped. There's only 4 songs in this movie, so it's not as heavy on the musical elements. It's definitely still there. This isn't one of those Disney films that's like a borderline musical. It almost doesn't even count as a musical. The musical numbers are there and they're totally legitimate, but it does seem like the focus isn't as much on that. So the movie Mulan was based on a poem from the 6th century Chinese called The Ballad of Fa Mulan. They stay pretty close to the original story, basically about a woman who goes to war disguised as a man. So all the songs in this film were written by Matthew Wilder, who I guess was some singer-songwriter who achieved some moderate level of renown in the 80s. I think this is still his best known music or writing work. And then the lyrics are by David Zippel. Actually, Matthew Wilder had worked previously on Hercules, so they knew him, and then they brought on a different lyricist for this film to collaborate with him. The first song in the movie is called Honor to Us All, and you can hear, just like they did with The Lion King, they tried to incorporate more African sounds or instrumentation, try to make it more sound a little authentic to its setting. They try to do the same thing with this one. You can hear This is probably the most prominent example of American musicals attempting to appropriate or approximate East Asian sound since maybe Flower Drum Song. Probably the next prominent example of that. It's got a bit of a tradition, I guess, in musical theater. So what's interesting about the songs of Mulan is that they have more of a thematic through line than any of the other films do. You know, the other films, the purpose of the songs or the meaning behind the songs kind of shifts to adapt whatever the part of the story they're trying to tell or whatever character is performing the song. They're kind of all over the place. But every single song in Mulan deals in some way with gender roles or gendered expectations in society, which is really interesting. It's a theme that they're actually able to carry through the entire movie. Because this first song is about how Mulan, and the next song too, they're both about how Mulan doesn't really fit into what society expects out of her. But it's not like by the end of the movie, it's like, oh, she found her true calling as a soldier. It's not about that. What it's saying is that the society that she lives in needs to be able to accommodate people like her who don't fit into these roles but who can adapt. Even by today's standards, that's a pretty impressively progressive, it's almost a radical message in some circles. They're doing arranged marriages in the society, so they're trying to figure out who they would match her with, and this is what all the young women in her society have to go through. Mulan may have started the whole Chinese character tats trend on her arm. I'm not sure where that all started, but it may very well have been here. This song is an interesting structure too because it's basically the same main melody part throughout the whole thing with little kind of throwaway parts in between like this where there are more voices coming in. So every song in here ends up being relevant to its theme in some way. In fact, this song is basically a part one to the next song's part two. They kind of work in tandem together, and neither one is really as strong without both of them leading into it or coming right after it. There are a lot of voices singing this song too. It's not just one or two singers. So this is kind of the song where a lot of different characters get to jump in and sing their own little parts. And it's kind of unique. You get some of that in the other movies, but it's not always characters with names. And this is where Mulan finally starts singing for the first time in the movie. The voice is done by Lea Salonga, who's the same singer who did the voice of Jasmine in those songs from Aladdin. By the way, I'd like to think somebody who did the writing for the lyrics for Mulan must have been a wrestling fan, right? Because where else do you hear about a scary Undertaker? Maybe it's some kind of cultural fear that I don't know about. I don't know. The next song. I really wish the movie version of the song would have been longer. I felt like it would have been fine to go through all the verses and the choruses in this part of the song.
I will never pass for a perfect bride.
See, she says that she'll never pass. That's terminology that you hear. I'm trying not to read too much into this, but they do use that terminology when it comes to things such as presenting as a certain gender, and it does happen to be... Mulan's not a trans character. I don't think she's, even today, is looked at that way. But she does attempt to pass as a man and succeeds for a while. The only reason she gets caught is because she gets wounded in battle, and they have to basically dress her wounds, and that's how they figure out. I wonder if when they wrote these lyrics, if they were... I'm sure that word choice was intentional in this case. I don't think they were trying to evoke those... trying to go that far with the theme necessarily, but I do think it is interesting that they use that. Mulan's parents look so disappointed. And this is Lea Salonga again. This is a totally solo number from her, which is kind of a rare thing in these movies. So this one is strongly about the theme of identity. It's about really not knowing who you are yet, but all you know is that what you're not. You know that you're not what society wants you to be. I just think this one has a really strong anthemic, sort of uplifting feel to it that they could have sustained for longer in the movie. The movie version is almost already over. Like some of the songs in this movie seem like they end a little weirdly and abruptly to me. This is just basically a verse and then a chorus, and that's it. Like, oh, it's just getting good. Oh well. This next song, I'm fairly certain, well, other than the last one, this one is probably the most well-remembered song from this film, or at least it deserves to be, because the singer is Donny Osmond. You can imagine how exciting that would have been to me growing up as a Mormon kid. The only Mormon in show business they managed to get for this film, and really, they did a pretty good job with, I think, balancing the voice cast. They did use a few non-Asian actors. Those were mostly for the comic relief roles, or for the villainous roles, but they did manage to make the casting mostly Asian in this film, but I don't think even people who advocate really strongly for, accurate representation when it comes to voice casting animated films would complain about the chance. I mean, if you get a chance to use Donny Osmond to sing a song in your film, please take it. He's got so much conviction on this song, and he absolutely sells every word of it. I believe that Donny Osmond will make a man out of me when I listen to the song. This is I'll Make a Man. This one's got more militaristic sound to it. So let's get down to business. So this is basically the Rocky-style training montage song of the film, which Disney movies really hadn't done before. They were still trying to do different types of songs or different types of musical numbers for their films at this point. And even, it's weird because you would think that Hercules would have had one of those types of songs, and they really didn't. Hercules basically felt like all the songs were commercial jingles to me. But I think it's kind of a precarious balance that this song walks, because without having, coming off having an attitude like, oh, but what about the men? It does manage to explain that Mulan is a little bit in over her head at this point in the story. She is grown up, knowing what the expectations were on her as a woman, knowing what the expectations would be there, but not really being as familiar with what the expectations would be as far as being a man in her society would have gone. This is where she gets that crash course in that and realizes that it's all going to be a lot tougher than she thinks. Yeah, maybe being a man is praised or it's held in higher regard, but it's also something that you do have to work for, the values that they want you to have or to present as a man. I just think this wouldn't have worked nearly as well without Donny Osmond. I like the shiner that Mulan gets. He's really not going easy on her. See, this part was always interesting to me because, wait a minute, does Mulan have the option to just go home? Can she just leave and say, I'm sorry, I didn't make the cut, I'm not going to be in the war after all, I guess. I guess she had to do it for her family. But I do kind of wonder if that crossed her mind. Maybe this movie doesn't have that many songs, so they didn't need as many. All the songs are good. But after this, do you really want to hear, like, a reprise of Reflection or something? I don't know. And it just kicks too much ass. So what I like about it is that all the things that they're saying that a man must be are all things about nature. They're not specific to men. I guess anybody can be a man. That's the message of the song. Thank you, Donny Osmond. Wow. I feel a lot more powerful now. Let's go to war. Last song on, well, at least in this movie, the last song is called A Girl Worth Fighting For. So again, we have another song where the theme is about gender and expectations and what people want out of a partner. Surprisingly sophisticated treatments and handling of these themes in the movie for a Disney film. This is kind of the Just for Funsies song of the movie, although it does end on a really, radical tonal whiplash moment, which I'll get to. See, what's great about Mulan is that she comes into the camp immediately. They know that she's not the ideal man, but then neither is any of the people that she's training with. Nobody embodies, well, maybe Shang. Okay, so the character in the previous song, who is voiced by Donny Osmond doing that singing part, maybe that's the closest that this film comes to having an actual, ideal male character in the film, but then other than that, they all fall short in certain ways, so it's sort of a commentary on that. They kind of, how they set an impossible standard for themselves. And then they do the same thing with the women in turn. This part is interesting, so... Mulan is apparently super fine as a guy. Yeah, this is really ahead of its time. I think in 1998, even today, we're probably not ready for this. In 1998, we definitely weren't as ready. I love this. James Hong is in this movie, and he even sings a line here. They really kind of went all out and tried to get every known Asian actor or actress at this time. Ming-Na Wen is the voice of Mulan, B.D. Wong is the voice of Shang. Those were basically the two Asian people on TV at this time. A pretty honest, I think, good faith effort to have as much accurate or authentic representation as possible in this film. This is the part that's kind of whiplash right here. They're just like standing in front of this town that's been destroyed and burned and razed to the ground. I just thought that was an interesting choice, I guess. I mean, yeah, that's one way if you want people to forget what the entire last scene was about. Yeah, just have that kind of total 180 in the tone and the plot of the film. So that's it for as far as songs that actually appear in the movie. There was a pop version of the song, and you know you're getting pretty close to the end of the 90s when you have Christina Aguilera singing a pop version of a Disney song. Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears were basically both on Mickey Mouse Club at the same time. They ended up becoming, inevitably compared to each other in everything they did from then on. But as far as I know, Britney Spears never sang any pop versions of Disney musical songs. So this is the full version of the song that I wish had been in the movie. Not with Christina singing it, but I wish they had actually gone through the entire song. I like that these days I feel like the movie versions of Disney songs are getting more popular than they were before. People actually will listen to them outside of the context of the movie, like with How Far I'll Go or with How Let It Go was before then. I really think those two songs wouldn't have existed without this one, by the way. How often did the Disney princesses before this one really sing about their whole issues with identity and with their personality and with their place in the society that they were in? You had maybe Belle, but Belle is just going around saying, yeah, I'm Belle, whatever, deal with it. But she's not really exploring, what parts of her psyche make her that way, or what can she do now that she knows that she doesn't fit in. I mean, where can she go from there? You don't just stop there. You don't just say, well, I don't belong in this world, I guess I'll just stay in it and wait for something to come along. This really gives the character a lot more agency than they ever had before. And yeah, I really think characters like Moana and Elsa really started with Mulan. They all owe something to that. Christina's very young in this video, by the way. She's about 17 years old, I think. By the way, you wouldn't believe how popular this song was to sing for girls in drama class. I think about half of them sang this song at some point. It's kind of perfect for that, really. You gotta have the voice for it, but if you do, then you gotta go for it. I mean, the year before this, they were singing that Celine Dion song. And then this year, that was the song that took that role. See, this full version of the song just goes so much deeper into all the themes and the issues of identity that it tries to explore. I just think it needs a little more room to breathe. I hope someday there's a cut of this movie that includes the full version of the song, but who knows. Maybe the remake will do that. I believe this is Christina Aguilera's first English language single that got popular in America. And there we go. So I feel like prior to this, Disney sort of used established singers and established pop stars to perform their singles when they converted them into pop songs. This is the first time that I can remember. I mean, prior to this, they had Michael Bolton singing the song from Hercules. So this is the first time I remember that they actually used one of their songs to launch the career of an actual singer. This movie had two pop songs from its soundtrack, and this one is by 98 Degrees and Stevie Wonder, and it's called True to Your Heart. I don't know if I remember this one. Okay, this is clearly going for some kind of 70s Stevie Wonder vibe. Wow, I don't remember this at all. Wow, 98 Degrees wardrobe collapse. You gotta see this. He's got these jackets, go down to here, the backwards cap. Oh, he's got a chain. When you see Lonely Island dressing up all funny in their videos, these are basically the guys they're making fun of. Yeah, absolutely none of this is familiar to me. This really must have not been successful at all. Come on, Stevie, sing something. Here we go. Man, showing him how it's done. It's kind of weird that Stevie Wonder never was on any previous Disney songs, isn't it? I think they would have tried to use him at some point. Okay, that song's not good. So that was it as far as the songs from Mulan went. After that, Disney really started to fall into another slump. From there, well, they had Tarzan the following year, and then they had The Emperor's New Groove, which is an awesome movie. But I think from about the early 2000s to basically the era that started with the current day, I think started with Princess and the Frog, maybe. That's when they started to get things back on track, and they started to have movies that were a little more acclaimed, a little more successful and popular. You know, it took them a while. Yeah, I think I'm always probably going to feel a personal connection to that movie in a way that I don't with a lot of the others. Even though I admire the others for their artistry and for their craft, and they have a lot of good moments in them, and I have a lot of good memories associated with them, yeah, for me, this is the one that I think holds up the best, at least. You know, it doesn't have some of the questionable ideas or attitudes of the earlier films. They really carry the theme through. I think that's what basically redeems it for me. Whatever flaws it may have, you know, whatever your feelings on it, I can't help but respect that they managed to pull that off in a kids movie from 1998. Until next time, I am the Jake Wayo, and this was Bad 90s Music. I didn't choose the 90s, they chose me.